I sacrificed everything to buy my parents a farmhouse. I came back, unannounced, and found my frail father sweeping gravel in 100-degree heat while my sister-in-law lounged above him, sneering, "Watch it, old man." She had no idea who owned every inch of that property. My father stopped sweeping for exactly 1 second, just one, to wipe the sweat from his eyes with the back of his wrist. A gesture so small, so human, so utterly exhausted. And that 1 second was apparently 1 second too many. The broom clattered across the gravel before I even fully processed what I was seeing. Brittany had kicked it out of his hands. She did it with her foot the way you'd nudge a dog off the couch. Casual, reflexive, the movement of someone who had done this before, enough times that it no longer required full effort. She swung her leg off the wicker porch. Lounger, silk shorts, designer, sunglasses, a glass of iced tea, sweating in the Georgia heat, and she kicked the broom, and it spun across the gravel and landed 6 feet from my father's worn work boots. He didn't flinch. That was the thing that broke something in me. He didn't flinch, which meant he had learned not to. Watch it, old man. Her voice carried the full 40 feet of driveway between us, sharp and unhurried. "You're getting dust on my $600 sandals. Finish the driveway or you don't eat tonight. I'm not feeding a freeloader." Beside her on the porch, a woman I recognized as Brittany's mother, Brenda. Thick gold earrings, the laugh of someone who finds other people's suffering entertaining. Raised her own glass. "Honestly, you have the patience of a saint. These people are like indentured servants, except they're incompetent ones." They both laughed. My father bent down and picked up the broom without a word. Without looking up, my duffel bag hit the gravel. "I need you to understand something before I go further. I need you to understand it specifically with numbers, because numbers are the only language that makes this real rather than dramatic. My name is Samantha Sammy Calloway. I am 31 years old. I have spent the last 6 years of my life in a basement apartment in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, in a unit with no central heat and a radiator that worked roughly 40% of the time, eating one real meal a day and supplementing with gas station food when the budget was thin, which it was most of the time, working 80-hour weeks as a freelance data analyst and later a junior contractor for 2 mid-sized logistics firms. Simultaneously, I did this by choice. I want to be clear about that. I did it because my parents, Earl and Mary and Calloway, 68 and 66 years old, Earl with his angina and Marianne with the rheumatoid arthritis that had been quietly dismantling her hands since her early 50s, were living in a rented house in suburban Atlanta that was too expensive, too far from good medical care, and too much of their fixed income every month. I did it because my father's medication alone was $840 a month before insurance adjustments, and the insurance adjustments were not generous. I did it because I found a farmhouse, 14 acres in Carroll County, Georgia, white clapboard siding, a porch, a garden plot that Marian had cried when she saw, because it was exactly the size she'd always wanted. A property tax bill that was manageable on a fixed income, a house that needed work, but had good bones. The same thing people had always said about my family. I bought it through an LLC I registered in 2019, Calloway Family Holdings LLC. My name on every line of the operating agreement. My name on the deed. My lawyer, a compact, precise woman named Princess Nwanchukwu, 15 years in real estate and estate law, who had the handshake of someone who meant every word she said, had structured it specifically to ensure that the property could not be encumbered, sold, or transferred without my written authorization. I paid $187,000 in cash. It took me 4 years of saving. I moved my parents in on a Saturday in November 2020. I could not afford to fly down. I watched the move Through FaceTime, Marianne walking. Through each room with her hand over her mouth. Earl standing in the garden with his arms crossed the way he did when he was trying not to cry. I sat on my air mattress in Chicago at 11 p.m. and I watched my parents walk through a house I had bought for them, and I ate a granola bar for dinner, and I told myself it was worth it. It was worth it. That was the story I told myself for 6 years. My brother David, 34, 2 years. Older than me, charming in the specific way of people who have learned that charm is cheaper than effort, had volunteered to move south 6 months. After my parents settled in, he said he wanted to be closer to them, said the Chicago winters were getting to his girlfriend Brittany, who had grown up in Florida and found anything below 60 degrees a personal affront, said it would be good for everyone to have family nearby. I had sent him the details of the property, the LLC structure, the fact that the house was mine, and the arrangement was that he and Brittany could stay temporarily while they got settled. He said he understood. He moved in on a Tuesday. He never moved out. Our weekly calls were 30 minutes, always initiated by me, always ending with David saying everything was fine. Dad's doing great, Sammy. Mom's basically living in the garden. They love it here. You don't need to worry. He said those words so consistently over so many months that they became a kind of ambient noise, always present, never examined. I was too exhausted to examine them. I was working. I was always working. I had started a 3rd contract. In 2022, a 6-month engagement with a supply chain analytics firm that had turned into a permanent part-time arrangement. And between the 3 income streams, I was bringing in enough to send $3,500 a month to the joint account I'd set up for family expenses. My parents' medications, groceries, property taxes, utilities, and still cover my own rent and keep $200 in my personal account on a good month. The first time I noticed something wrong was January of this year. My mother called me on a Sunday afternoon, not our usual day, not our usual time, and she sounded thin, not sick, just smaller than herself, like a recording played at slightly lower volume. How are you? Eating, Mom? I asked. A pause. Oh, you... No, we manage. We manage. My mother, who had kept a garden her entire adult life, could produce a 3-course meal from whatever was left in the refrigerator on a Thursday, who had never in my memory used the phrase we manage about food. Is there enough in the account? I said. I sent the transfer last week. Another pause, shorter, but there. I'm sure it's fine, sweetheart. David handles all of that. David handles all of that. I told myself it was nothing, that she was tired, that David was managing the finances because he was local and I was in Chicago, and it made logistical sense. That we manage was just a phrase, not a signal. I was wrong. The second flag came in March. My father called me at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday, early even for him, early enough that I was still in the dark. Before dawn phase of a day I'd been up since 4 o'clock to finish a report. He asked me very quietly whether I could look into whether his cardiologist could write the heart medication prescription for a longer supply because the monthly trips to the pharmacy were getting difficult. Difficult how? I said. He was quiet for a moment. Just transportation-wise, David's busy. Is David driving you to your appointments? Brittany usually has the car, Dad. It's fine, Sammy. I figure things out. I always figure things out. His voice was the voice of a man trying very hard not to ask for help, which was the voice he used when he needed help most. I hung up the call and I opened the joint account portal and I looked at what $3,500 a month had been doing for the past 14 months. The grocery charges were thin, irregular, the kind of pattern you saw when people were shopping less than they needed to. The pharmacy charges were present, but there were gaps missed. Months or partial fills, which in the context of heart medication was not a minor administrative detail, but the specific financial signal of a person rationing a drug he needed to stay alive. Against these entries, other charges told a different story. A Neiman Marcus charge for $847, an entry for something called Lux Foam Decor 1. Balance 214 TR, a recurring charge for a subscription meal delivery service, not the kind with practical portions, the kind with truffle oil and sourced ingredients, and $28 per serving. In Brittany's name, charge to the family account $340 a month. Spa services twice, a nail salon monthly, a gym membership I had not authorized. My hands went cold. I mean that literally. And the blood left my fingers, and the room felt like it had dropped in temperature. And I sat there in my heating optional apartment in February, and I felt in my body the specific sick clarity of understanding that you have been paying for two completely different realities. I did not call David. This is important. I want to be very specific about what I did next, because it is the decision that made everything else possible. I did not call David. I called Princess. Princess Nwachukwu had been mine real estate attorney since the LLC formation, and she had expanded over the years into a kind of general legal counsel for anything involving Callaway family holdings. She was 44 years old, 5 feet 2 inches, and had the specific energy of someone who keeps very detailed notes and never needs to raise her voice to be the most powerful person in a room. I told her everything: the account analysis, medication gaps, my parents, phone calls, the Neiman Marcus charges. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me about David's access structure, she said. I walked her through it. The joint account, which I had set up with David as an authorized secondary user, not a co-owner, a distinction that felt technical when I had established it, and felt absolutely critical now. The property deed, which was held entirely by the LLC, the operating agreement. His name is not on the deed. No. His name is not on the LLC. No. He is an authorized user on a discretionary expense account that you fund. Yes. Another pause. Sammy, you understand. That authorized user status is revocable at will. I know. The question, she said carefully, is whether you want to move now or gather more information first. I thought about my father's voice at 6:47 a.m. I figure things out. I always figure things out. Both, I said at the same time. She said she'd get to work. Over the following 6 weeks, a day's pulled every document, the account statements, the property tax records showing the LLC as sole owner, the original purchase records, the operating agreement with my signature on every page. She also connected me with a colleague of hers, James Whitfield, CPA, 30 years in forensic accounting, who had the demeanor of a man who has spent 3 decades looking at financial records and is no longer surprised by anything but remains professionally outraged. James spent 2 weeks analyzing 14 months of the joint account, the total diverted from the account's stated purpose: medications, groceries, medical appointments, property maintenance, and redirected to personal luxury spending, was $61,340. $61,340. He put the number at the top of his report in bold. Below it, he itemized every charge Brittany's name appeared on. 47 of them. David's on 11. Brenda, Brittany's mother, who I had never given any access to anything, appeared on 6, which meant she had been using a card that David had furnished her from the authorized account. James sent the report to a days at 9:14 a.m. on a Thursday. A Daisy called me at 9:22. You need to go to Georgia, she said. I know. I said, don't call David first. I won't. I'm going to draft a revocation of authorized user status, a demand letter, and a formal notice of trespass while you're in transit, she said. I'll also be looping in Detective Marcus Webb from the Carroll County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Division. He's been briefed. He has a copy of James's report. Detective Marcus Webb, 11 years in financial crimes investigation before moving to Carroll County. A days described him as methodical and unsentimental, which, given the circumstances, was exactly what I needed. I booked a flight for the following morning. I told no one. I landed at Hartsfield-Jackson at 8:40 p.m. and rented a car, a white Kia that smelled like air freshener and drove like a golf cart but got me where I needed to go. I drove the 47 miles to Carroll County on a state highway, through peach orchards and red clay and the specific lot gorgeous nothing of Georgia in July with a radio off and my hands steady on the wheel. I had slept on the plane 4 hours, which was more than I usually got. I turned onto the dirt road that led to the farmhouse at 11:08 a.m. and I stopped the car because the scene at the end of the road was not the scene my brother had been describing to me for 14 months. My father was in the driveway. Earl Calloway, 68 years old, a man with severe angina, and a cardiologist who had told him in February that his next stress test would determine whether he needed intervention, was bent over a bush broom in 100 degrees heat, sweeping gravel in the sun without a hat. 30 feet away on the shaded porch I had paid for Brittany sat, in a lounger with a glass of iced tea, and silk shorts and sunglasses that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Beside her Brenda with the gold earrings, and the laugh, and on the far side of the house, visible through the garden gate, my mother Mary and Calloway, 66 years old, rheumatoid arthritis in both hands, her knuckles already swollen in cold weather, let alone July, was on her knees in the garden, not gardening, washing. There was a plastic tub of water pile of quilts, and she was scrubbing them by hand in the direct sun, her hands moving in a way that I could see from 40 feet away was not the movement of someone whose hands were working properly. I stood at the end of the road. I did not make a sound. I watched my father stop for 1 second to wipe sweat from his eyes. I watched Brittany kick the broom out of his hands. I watched my father bend down and pick it up without a word, and something happened in me that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't rage. Rage is hot. And I felt cold. It wasn't grief, though. Grief was in it somewhere. The specific grief of understanding that something you believed was not true. It was more like a circuit closing, like the last connection being made in a system that had been building for 2 years. I had everything I needed. I had the documents. I had the forensic accounting. I had Atticus on standby. I had Detective Webb briefed and ready. I had the operating agreement and the deed, and 14 months of transaction records and a lawyer who did not lose. My duffel bag hit the gravel. Brittany's head snapped around at 40 feet in her designer sunglasses. She assessed me in under 3 seconds. Worn sneakers, faded jacket, dark circles under my eyes, duffel bag. The full picture of someone who had been working themselves down to the bone for 6 years and wore the evidence of it. Plainly, her brain made the only calculation it knew how to make. Are you deaf? She waved her hand the way you wave at something that isn't worth a full gesture. Get off this property before I call the sheriff. Use the service entrance if you're lost. Trash. I did not speak. I pulled out my phone. 6 years of data lived in that banking portal. Every transfer, every statement, every auto payment confirmation going back to the day I'd set up the account. Every dollar I'd wired at midnight in a Chicago basement after a 12-hour shift. Every $3,500 I had wired the most. Recent transfer this month's for medications and groceries 12 hours ago. Brittany's sandals were new Prada. I could see the price tag crease on the left strap from 20 feet. The math was very simple. I opened the banking portal. Tap. 1. Account settings. Authorized user. Management. David Calloway and Brittany Calloway. Authorized access. Revoked. Tap 2. The 3 platinum credit cards linked to the account. Frozen. The secondary checking account David had been using as a personal overdraft fund. Frozen. All automatic transfers rerouted. Back to my primary LLC holding. Top 3. I opened my phone screen. Recorder, something I'd activated before. I got out of the car and confirmed it. Was running. Done. The guillotine had dropped. They just hadn't felt it yet. I walked up the porch steps. My father had stopped sweeping. He was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on his face since I was a child. Open. Unguarded. The expression of someone who cannot yet trust what they're seeing. Sammy, he said. Just that. My name in. His voice in the July heat. Hey, Daddy, I said. Go inside. Take Mom. Get some water. What? Please. Something in my voice, the steadiness of it maybe, or the fact that it was steady at all made him listen. He moved toward the house without another word, and as he passed the garden gate, he stopped and said something to Mary and that I couldn't hear, and a moment later they were both moving toward the front door. Mary and wiping her hands on her jeans, her knuckles raw and red in the light. I watched them go inside. Then I turned around. Brittany had stood up. She was performing confidence the way people perform it when something has shifted, and they don't yet know how much. Arms crossed, chin up, the full posture of a woman who had spent 14 months running a household that wasn't hers and had started to believe it was. David said, "You are a workaholic mess," she said. Her voice had lost some of its edge, though she hadn't noticed yet. He wasn't wrong. She looked me up and down. Go. Wash up inside, and don't track mud on my hardwood floors. My hardwood floors. Call the sheriff, I said. She blinked. Excuse me? Call them. My voice was even. Tell them you're currently trespassing on property deeded solely in the name of Callaway Family Holdings LLC, of which I am the sole member. Tell them you've diverted $61,340 from a family expense account. Money designated for my father's heart, medication, and my parents' groceries too. Personal luxury purchases, which is documented in 14 months of account statements currently in the possession of a forensic accountant and the Carroll County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Division. Brittany's laugh came out. Wrong, shaky at the edges, the way a table sounds when one leg is shorter than the others. Your name? David owns this house. David had authorized user access to a discretionary expense account, I said. Past tense. He does not appear on the deed, the LLC operating agreement, the property tax records, or any instrument of ownership. This property belongs to my LLC. You own nothing here. Not the wood under your feet. Not the ice in that glass. Not the phone in your hand. Brittany's phone buzzed. She looked down. Alert. Credit. Card ending 4009 suspended. She looked up at me. Her phone buzzed again. Alert. Credit card ending 7731 suspended. And again. Alert. Mercedes-Benz payment declined. And then with the specific timing of a thing arriving exactly when it needs to. Alert. Checking account. Balance 0.0. The color left her face in stages. First the confidence, then the expression underneath it, then something that was almost a person reduced by several layers to something frightened and small. What did you do? She whispered. I revoked your access. I said, which I was always legally entitled to do, which I'm now documenting on a screen recording that has been running for the last 4 minutes. I held up the phone briefly. You have 3 minutes to leave with whatever you personally own and can carry. Minute. For I call 911 and provide detective Marcus Webb, Carroll County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Division, case number. Already opened with the video I have of you instructing a 68-year-old man with documented severe angina to sweep a driveway in 100-degree heat under threat of withholding food. That's elder abuse. Under Georgia Code 3528, it is a felony. Brenda made a sound I have no clean description for. She dropped her glass It shattered across the porch boards. The iced tea went in every direction. Cold liquid splashed across Brittany's $600 sandals and Brenda's bare feet and the carefully swept gravel below the steps. Brenda screamed. Brittany said, "We have nowhere to go." "That is not my problem," I said. 2 minutes, 50 seconds. What happened next happened. First, Brittany's knees hit the porch boards before I fully tracked the motion. Brenda was already down, hands on my jeans, words coming out in a tangle. "Please, please, Samantha. We have nowhere. Please, we'll go. We'll explain." David didn't tell us these. And Brittany was crying in the specific way of someone who has never had to really cry before and doesn't know how. Ugly and graceless, and without any of the performance she'd had an hour ago. I looked at them. 2 women who had spent 14 months living like guests of honor in my parents' home, off my parents' dignity, on my money. 2 women who had kicked a broom out of an old man's hands and laughed about it, on their knees on broken glass. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pleasure, not the hot release of rage, just the cold, specific feeling of a thing being over. I stepped over them and opened the front door. My mother was in the kitchen. She was standing at the sink with a glass of water and her hands braced on the counter, resting them because resting was what you did when your knuckles were split from washing quilts in a plastic tub in July. She looked up when I came in and her face did something complicated. Relief and grief and love and exhaustion all moving through it at once. The expression of someone who has been holding something for too long and has just been told they can put it down. I crossed the kitchen and I put my arms around her and she made a sound that I will not describe here because some things belong only to the people who were in the room. My father was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the specific stillness of a man trying to regulate his breathing, which Dr. Horace Bell, his cardiologist, 20 years at Emory Heart and Vascular, had told him specifically and repeatedly was the most important thing he could do for his condition. He looked at me across the table. "The house all right?" he said. "It's fine, Daddy. The house is Phoenix." I didn't know what to do, he said. David said, "I know what David said." I sat down across from him. "I know all of it and none of it was yours to fix." He looked at his hands, then at me. "You looked in," he said. "So did you," I said. He almost smiled. "Fair enough." Detective Weber arrived at 2:34 p.m., not because I had called him at that exact moment. I had messaged Adai when I got inside, and Adai had notified Webb's office, but because he had been prepared to move quickly, and he did. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered with the specific patience of a detective who has worked financial crimes long enough to know that the documents always tell the story better than the people do. He took my recorded footage. He reviewed the account statements Adai transmitted to his office while we were sitting at my parents' kitchen table. He reviewed James Whitfield's forensic accounting report, all 41 pages with the yellow highlights and the itemized charge analysis. He looked at my father's medication records, the gaps in fill dates, the months where the prescription had been partially filled because the account that was supposed to cover it had been running thin. He looked up at me. "The authorized user revocation is clean," he said. Adai and Wachuku filed the formal documentation this morning. I said, "She can be reached and I have her number," he said. We spoke. He stood up. "Miss Calloway," he said, "I want to be clear that the elder abuse component of this, the documented physical confrontation, the food withholding, statements on your recording, the pattern of using a dependent elderly person for labor is being treated as a separate matter from the financial fraud. Both are serious. Both are being documented. I understand. Your brother is going to be contacted today. I know. Is there anything you need for your Parents in the immediate term, medical. Logistical? I have that covered, I said. Thank you. He nodded once and left. David called at 4:51 p.m. I let it go too. Voicemail. He called again at 5:03 and 5:17 and 5:29, at which point he sent a text that said, Sammy, I can explain everything. Brittany got carried away. I didn't know how bad it was. Please call me back. Please. I looked at it for a long time. He didn't know how bad it was. He had been in the house. He had watched his father sweep gravel. He had watched his mother wash quilts by hand. He had made the call every week and said, they're doing great, Sammy. Don't worry. He had handed Brittany's mother a card linked to my account. He had watched the pharmacy fill reports come in short and said nothing to me. He didn't know how bad it was. I turned my phone face down. Some things don't have a response worth making. I called at 7:15 with an update. The formal demand letter had gone to David and Brittany's last known address, a hotel. It turned out, which told me the rest of the story without requiring elaboration. The demand outlined the $61,340 in misappropriated funds and gave a 14-day response window before formal civil proceedings. Webb's office had made initial contact. A criminal referral regarding the elder abuse. Documentation was moving through the county system. The LLC protection is solid, she said. The property is untouchable. What do you need from me? Now, change the account structure. I said, new account, my name only. I'll manage the payments directly, and I need to add a formal healthcare proxy for both my parents. I'll draft it tomorrow. Thank you, Audeises. Sammy, she paused. The first time in 2 years I'd heard her pause mid-conversation. I'm glad you went down there. Me, too, I said. I slept in the farmhouse that night for her. The first time my parents' room was at the end of the hall, and I lay in the spare room with the window open to the Georgia night, the sound of cicadas and the smell of the garden and the soft, specific darkness of a place that is far enough from anywhere to be genuinely quiet. And I thought about 6 years in a basement apartment about the radiator that worked 40% of the time, about the granola bars and the 80-hour weeks and the $40 in my account while I wired 3,500 south every month. I had done all of it for this house, for the sound of my parents breathing safely down the hall. I had done it, and someone had taken it and turned it into a performance of ownership, a stage set for 2 women with iced tea and designer sandals and not a single dollar of skin in any of it. I thought about that for a while. Then I let it go, the way you let go of things that are over, not forgetting them, just releasing the grip. Because holding on doesn't change what happened and costs you the sleep you need. I slept for 8 hours, the first full 8 hours, and longer than I could remember. 5 months later, the civil proceedings settled in November. David and Brittany signed a repayment agreement for $61,340, structured over 48 months because they did not have the money in a lump sum, which surprised no one. The agreement included a formal acknowledgement of the misappropriation, which was not legally required, but which Audeises had included, and which they had signed because the alternative was a civil trial, with James Whitfield's 41-page report entered as Exhibit A, the criminal elder abuse. Matter resulted in a misdemeanor plea for Brittany with probation and mandatory community service. Not everything I had hoped for, more than I had expected. Detective Webb called me when it resolved. He didn't say much, just it's done. Your parents' documentation was solid. You did the right thing going down there. I know, I said. My father's next stress test in September came back improved. Dr. Bell attributed it to reduced stress and consistent medication access, which was the clinical way of saying that when a 68-year-old man with angina is no longer being made to sweep driveways in July, his heart works better.